Um, Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today for Amplifying LGBT plus Korean Voices. My name is Kevin Moon, co-chair of the KCS Associate Board. Before we start the event today, I just want to give a brief introduction on KCS and the Associate Board for those who may not be familiar with. Linda will speak more about KCS shortly, so very briefly, KCS is a nonprofit community service organization based in Flushing, Queens, right here in New York, that has been providing a wide range of community services since 1975, with the goal to serve low-income immigrants with various needs. And we, as the Associate Board, work to raise awareness and support KCS among young professionals. So in a year when the Black Lives Matter movement and other protests for social justice have shed a light on the urgent need for change in our society, we hope to confront our own community's deep-seated prejudices by amplifying the little heard voices and engaging in soul-searching conversations. We want to do that through a series of conversations highlighting and honoring the voices that are not often heard in the Korean American community. So with the hope to create a little spark to begin and expand these conversations. So we started this by our previous event on the racism in the Korean community with Marja and Milton. And today, we're continuing on the dialogue with the LGBT plus community with Schuyler Bailar. So with that, with no further ado, I'll pass it on to our amazing president, Linda Lee.
Hi, everyone. We're super excited for tonight's event, and I just wanted to thank our amazing associate board for putting this event together. I'm sorry if you hear background noise. There's another thing going on. But yes, we have been around actually since 1973 and have been serving the community, the marginalized folks who need services. And we have done everything from senior center programs. We have 2 senior centers funded by the city, as well as the only state licensed mental health clinic in New York State. And I think a lot of what we do is really try to fight for the marginalized communities and also to make sure that there is no one that's left behind. And we feel very strongly that language barriers, socioeconomic status should not be a barrier to receiving help or services or to feel dignity as someone who belongs in this community. And so that's a large part of what we do. And, we're super excited about these series because it's an opportunity for us to talk about issues that may not necessarily be openly discussed as much in our community. And I'm excited for our speaker tonight for being so amazing and brave to share the journey of his life. So it's very exciting, I have to say. And even for us, for me personally, as someone who really firmly believes in, destigmatizing mental health issues and all these other issues in our community, I think it's very timely that this is happening right now. And this is a real great opportunity for us to have a very open and honest conversation and hear Schuyler's story. So we're very grateful. And I wanted to just introduce our esteemed moderator tonight. We have SK Yoon. She's an amazing board member of ours who also, we're fortunate enough that she has a background in journalism, communications, marketing, and she's been such an amazing board member for KCS and really expanding our mission. And so we're super excited to have her moderate tonight's discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping details. We recommend that you keep your Zoom screen on speaker mode so you can see Schuyler a little bit closely, but also, if possible, to keep your video on so that he can see you. We are gathering virtually tonight. We want our time together to be as interactive as possible. So also please send in your comments and questions in the chat box. After a presentation lasting about 20 minutes or so, we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So now a bit more about Schuyler. In high school, Schuyler Bailar was one of the country's fastest swimmers in the girls division. Many of the Ivy League coaches who recruited Schuyler believed NCAA championships would follow. But life took a few twists and turns. Schuyler did end up swimming for Harvard, but on its men's team, becoming the first openly transgender athlete to compete on an NCAA Division I men's team. It hasn't been an easy journey. Throughout high school, Schuyler struggled with body image and self-esteem issues, often battling with disordered eating and self-harm. The day after graduating from high school, he checked himself into a treatment facility to deal with these issues. Over countless hours of therapy, it became clear that Schuyler's real struggle was with gender identity and that he was transgender. This presented Schuyler with the most difficult decision of his life, whether to continue as a possible NCAA champion on the women's team or to transition to a man and be authentic to himself, accepting all the consequences and challenges that would entail. Schuyler's choice to be true to himself has been historic. His story has been recounted globally in thousands of media outlets, from the Washington Post and 60 Minutes to The Ellen Show. In 2019, Schuyler was awarded the prestigious Harvard Athletics Directors Award, which is not given annually and has only been granted 6 times before. It recognizes an athlete who has made an outstanding contribution to athletics through education. He graduated in 2019 and speaks widely about diversity and inclusion. Please join me in welcoming Schuyler Bailar.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, SK, for such a wonderful intro. I just wanted to start off by saying I'm so excited to hold space and community here with you all as Korean Americans and folks passionate about inclusion within the Korean American community, and just kind of bringing this conversation to folks like us, because I haven't seen that much before. And so it's really exciting for me to be here today. I'm going to actually share my screen and show you some pictures and tell you a little bit about myself, who I am, where I come from. But what I really want to do is have a conversation with you all. And so that will be during question and answers, which SK will be moderating. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat as I'm talking, and SK can ask me them when we get to that point in the presentation. So like I said, I'm going to share my screen, and then we are going to hop right in. All right. Okay, so I always like to start where I started, which is as a little baby. So I learned how to swim the same time I learned how to walk, which was about the age of 10 months old. I usually make a joke about how I will trip on stage when I'm actually on a stage before COVID, because I'm not much of a land animal. I spent my life in the water. I'm far more comfortable in the water. I never did land sports, or at least wasn't very good at them. I got good at swimming around the age of 9. That's 4th grade, I believe. But I wasn't particularly good at swimming. This is a 16th place plaque, so I wasn't winning anything just yet. I was far more concerned with that super cool Justin Bieber haircut, with this oversized Hawaiian shirt that I was obsessed with, and these glasses, which I'm not sure if you've seen them before, but they're the kind that when you go out into the sun, they turn into sunglasses, and I thought they were super, super cool. And so I would sit next to the window in class and try to like make them change to sunglasses. Yeah, I was a really cool middle school kid. This is another one of my hairdos, if you will. This is a Halloween parade one year, and I decided I was going to be a punk rock star. And I thought that all punk rock stars wore exclusively black clothing, had dog chains, and had mohawks. So this is my rendition. I think it's pretty clear I dressed myself. I don't have a dog, so I have no idea what kind of chain that is. And the mohawk is made out of Elmer's glue. Yes, real Elmer's glue, and not the kind that's like clear and dry, like the white kind that dries clear, but it was this red, like glittery, sparkly kind. And if you looked really closely, it had these like golden stars in it. So if you examined my mohawk, it was a bit of a star-spangled mohawk. I have a younger brother. His name is Jinwon. This is him in the water mohawk, if you will. He is 2 years younger than me, but he is 6'4" and about 250 pounds. In case you can't tell, I know I look enormous over the video. I am neither of those things. I am a whopping 5'8" and nowhere near 250 pounds. So he, despite being 2 years younger, has always been the one to carry me around. This is him in the orange. We grew up doing everything together, wearing fun hats, fun shoes, getting really muddy and going hiking together. We were inseparable as kids. Water sports, again, a really big part of my life, whether actually being in the water or screaming and jumping into the water. I'm not entirely sure what I was trying to accomplish in either of these photos, but I was 9 and I was happy. What else mattered? This is a yoga pose that I've done pretty much everywhere I've traveled. I think I must have been like 13 or 14 in this picture, maybe a little younger, but it's called the peacock, and I've done it pretty much everywhere I've traveled growing up. And when I went on tour a couple of years ago for speaking, I did it in front of every school that I visited. But I like to point out these pants. They're these khaki pants, and I don't know if you can see, but they zip off in the middle and they become shorts. Again, one of the things that brought me a lot of social creds in middle school, when I would like zip off half my pant leg in English class, my teacher's like, "What are you doing?" Airing out my leg, I guess. I have no idea. This was also like the Justin Bieber stage hair, where it like had to be shaggier, you know, and fall into your eyes for it to be cool. And again, clearly I was a super cool kid. I really wasn't, but we'll pretend. I also skateboarded and rollerbladed a lot as a kid, but if you'll notice, I'm wearing every single type of padding known to man, including underneath my cargo shorts. There are also butt pads. Those would be courtesy of my mother. She was very afraid I was going to break my butt. I did not, so apparently they worked. When I got to high school, though, a lot of things for me changed. And the number one thing that changed for me, as SK was talking about, was I started struggling with needing to fit in, a little bit with my mental health. I basically realized that I didn't fit in, and I was like, I think I should try. And the number one reason that was the case was because I didn't present my gender in a way that other people understood. And I was assigned female at birth, and I spent most of my childhood acting and presenting in the way that made me feel the most comfortable. That ended up being in a very boyish, masculine sense, as you saw in the pictures. I mean, I'm talking about stereotypes, right? And that's what felt comfortable to me. And my parents were lenient with that to a degree, and they let me wear the clothes that I wanted to and play with the people that I wanted to. My grandmother, my halmoni, did not like that so much, and she spent my childhood dressing me in pink clothes and skirts and dresses and asking me why I never wore makeup and when I was going to bring a nice Korean boy home. So I spent a lot of my childhood kind of existing in this in-between. Right. And I think middle school is a really difficult time, no matter who you are, especially socially. But for me, there was this added layer of gender, right? I never was girl enough to be considered a real girl. And other girls in my grade would explicitly tell me that you're not a real girl because I didn't look like one. Or act like one or whatever else. And I wasn't considered a real boy by the other boys in the grade because they knew that I was supposed to, quote, be a girl. And so I wasn't allowed to be a real boy either. And I got stuck between. And for a while, I tried to be proud of that, but bathrooms were so stressful for me. So I was supposed to use the girls' bathroom. That's what I was told. So that's what I did. And I was thrown out of every single girls' bathroom I ever went into in middle school. And it was always, "What are you doing in here? Get out of here. No boys in here. You look like a boy. This is a girls' bathroom." And I was like, "I'm 9. I'm just trying to, go pee. I'm not trying to pull any stunts." Right. But that got so stressful that I would run from one end of the school to the other end to find a single stalled staff only bathroom, because I figured it was better to get in trouble by going into a staff only bathroom than it was to get scorned by all the girls in my grade. And so when I got to high school, I thought, okay, new building, new people, new teachers, like, let me stop getting thrown out of bathrooms. And what do I change in order to do that? And I thought, maybe if I look like this image, this stereotype of a woman that everybody else says that I am, maybe then I'll stop getting bullied, right? Maybe I'll feel more comfortable. Maybe that's it. So I grew my hair out long. I stopped cutting it short. I asked my mom to take me to the women's section of the clothing store for the first time. I wore makeup, much to my halmoni's excitement, twice. Heels the same 2 times. But I looked the part. So this is me in high school. It's the same watch that I'm wearing now. This is me at my senior prom, the second time I wore makeup. At the time in high school, I was getting a 4.0 GPA. I was getting recruited to swim for Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Columbia, and Princeton. I was making national records on my swim team at the time. I was swimming faster than I'd ever swum before. I actually received my Harvard acceptance letter, and I was all ready to go to Harvard in the fall. I'd actually come out as gay. I knew that I liked girls, and I thought, okay, I'm supposed to be this girl, and I like girls. The word we use for that is gay. Maybe that's the thing that's different about me. Maybe that's what's making me, have this struggle. And I was dating a girl that I really liked at the time. Everything seemed to be going for me in high school. But for most of my high school experience, and especially in this photo, I was absolutely miserable. I felt so sad, so lost, so disconnected from myself all the time. But instead of taking any pause to figure out what that meant to me, I thought, you know what? I'm getting the good grades. I'm winning the gold medals. What does it matter if I'm miserable? But it did matter. And over time, my mental health began to suffer. And halfway through my high school career, I actually broke my back. In a biking accident, I fractured 3 vertebrae, and that robbed from me my number one vice, my number one passion, my number one pastime, swimming. And for 20 extra hours a week, I was no longer underwater. I was no longer training. I was no longer socializing. I was doing nothing. And it was in that space, in that emptiness, if you will, that my mental health deteriorated. I began struggling with an eating disorder, with depression, and with several other mental health issues. And I always like to pause at this point and remind any of you that if you are struggling with any kind of mental health issue, or if you know somebody who is, it's not something to do alone. It's time to get help. It's always time to get help with that. And that's why KCS is awesome, because they are providing that help in an affordable way. And I'm so happy to hear about that, especially in Korean. So that's awesome. But just generally speaking, getting help in that space when you're struggling with mental health is so important. So that's what I did. I reached out for help. I began seeing a therapist. And over the next couple of years, I tried to work on myself throughout high school. But I didn't really seem to be getting any better. And by the end of my high school career, I actually gone to the hospital a couple times for the mental health issues that I was having. And my parents switched me to a new therapist. And the new therapist said, I can't, this isn't it. You need more help. This 1 hour of outpatient therapy a week is not enough. You need to go to a residential treatment center. You need to put your life on pause and go to do this mental health stuff and prioritize mental health, because right now you're trying to swim, you're trying to do school, you're trying to socialize, and you're saying you're going to go to college in the fall. You have to take a break and you need to work on your mental health. I'm 17 years old. I'm in a high school. I have not been brought up to value mental health in that way. And I'm like, you want me to put my life on hold for what? You want me to take a break from the world? How do I tell my coaches that? How do I tell my teammates that? How do I tell my grandmother, my halmoni that? Like, how do I tell any of these people that? But I also felt like I had been banging my head against the wall for years at this point, and I wasn't getting any better. And I had no desire to live my life miserable. And this therapist said, hey, maybe this will help. So I thought, okay, maybe I should try that. So I went to a place in Miami, Florida. It's called the Oliver Pyatt Treatment Centers. It's a residential treatment center for eating disorder rehab. And I spent 131 days there, which is about 5 months. And it was the first place in my life that asked me to slow down and actually come to a stop. I wasn't allowed to see my family, my friends. I wasn't eating any of the same food. I wasn't swimming or doing any kind of exercise. I wasn't allowed to, and I wasn't even allowed to have my cell phone. And it was in that pause and that stop that I was finally able to realize and then say, I am transgender. Initially, that came with a ton of relief, right? It explained my childhood, explained why I never quite fit in, why bathrooms were so hard, why I'd always had so much trouble with gender. But you have to remember that I'm an athlete, and I've been recruited to swim for Harvard women's swim team. And you all probably know this, but gender is really important in sports, especially in swimming, where there isn't any kind of gender neutrality, no uniform that's gender neutral that I could have hid behind, right? No t-shirt and shorts. It's a tiny little Speedo or a one-piece women's suit. The gender boxes are very clear. So when I realized that I was transgender, I was very afraid that I was going to lose my sport, maybe even my team. I wasn't sure, right? And my coach at the time, who had recruited me for Harvard, the women's coach, she was calling me, kind of checking in. She knew I had taken this gap year for the mental health reasons, and she was supportive of that wonderfully. And she just wanted to see how it was going. So she calls me this one time and she's like, hey, how are you doing? What are you working on? And I was like, oh, I'm working on some parent stuff, some eating stuff, some gender stuff, and I'm continuing forward. She said, hold on. Gender stuff? What does that mean? And I paused and I thought to myself, if I tell her in this moment, there's a very real likelihood that I lose her. And not only might I lose her, but I might lose my teammates. I might lose Harvard. Maybe I lose swimming altogether. Do I want to take that risk? But then I thought I'd spent all this time trying to be honest with myself that I think I owe it to myself to be honest with my coach. So I had said very hesitantly into the phone, Steph, I'm transgender. I don't know what that implies about sport. All I know is that I want to swim. And she very hesitantly said, after a long pause, Schuyler, I don't know any trans people. I don't really know if I understand what it means to be trans. I don't even know if we have gay people on this team. But what I do know is that this team loves you and that we recruited you, that I recruited you here for a reason. So if you want to swim, you have a spot on this team. We're going to figure it out. And that was incredible, right? At least I wasn't going to lose my spot on the women's team. I could kind of continue forwards and figure out how I wanted to deal with this newly discovered part of myself without losing my sport and my spot on the women's team. So I continued forwards. My 131 days at this treatment center came to a close, and I began trying to reintegrate myself into the real world, including this newly discovered part of myself, this identity. And I started going by he, him, so male pronouns in some situations. I got a new haircut, something a little bit more fitting than the Elmer School Mohawk. I bought some more boys' clothes or men's clothes. I started walking into this presentation of myself once again. And my coach, again, keeping up with what was going on, calls me and she's like, hey, so you're taking all these steps forward to be yourself in the world, right? To be a man. But then you're going to be on the women's team? How is that going to work? I was like, it's fine. I was like super optimistic. It's fine. Like I'm going to be a woman over there. I'm going to be a man over there. Like what could go wrong? And she's like, well, I don't know. I have no idea, but I just want to make sure we're making the best decision for you. So she actually went and talked to the men's coach. I wasn't actually privy to this conversation, and I was told it was a very casual poolside conversation in which she just said, hey, I don't know what to do about this. What do you think? And Kevin, the men's coach, said, okay, so let me get this right. You have somebody who identifies as male, who wants to swim and wants to swim here at Harvard. And I, Kevin, well, I coach a men's swim team at Harvard. Why doesn't he swim for me? And I think when put that way, it can sound kind of simple, logical, maybe a little too simple, right? But if we think about Division I sports, we think about the governing body, the NCAA, right? The governing body of sports in this country. We think about the socio-political climate of this country. And then we think about the fact that this man, this cisgender, so not transgender man, has never interacted with a trans person or the transgender community before. And he's like, sure, bring the trans kid. That's pretty incredible. So they bring that to me. They say, okay, you have the option to swim for either team. What do you want to do? I actually burst into tears. I wasn't excited. I wasn't happy. I wasn't relieved. I was terrified. In that moment, I felt like I was being torn apart, and I found myself at a sort of crossroads. This is me thinking at my crossroads. If you'll notice, my glasses have turned into sunglasses. They have transitioned. But jokes aside, we've got this crossroads, right? On one side, there's everything that I've ever worked for to be this winning female athlete, right? I had started swimming before I turned 1. I had started competing by the time I was 6. I was training at 4 a.m. so I could do before and after school by the time I was 10. I was training 20 hours a week by the time I was 13. And I was nationally ranked by the time I was 15. My whole life, I had been training to be good at swimming. And swimming as a man, instantly shattering all of those potential goals and successes that I could have had as a woman, right? Swimming as a man, though, would be me being myself in my sport for the first time in my life. It would also be doing something that somebody else hadn't done before. So in that office that day, I sat and I said, no, I can't do the men's team. I think I have to swim for the women's team. I'm not ready. I'm not ready to give up all the potential success I've worked for. And I'm definitely not ready to do this thing that everybody else hasn't done before that sounds so scary to me. My coach just said, hey, it's February. You have until September to figure this out. So let's leave that door open. So I continued forwards. I actually ended up getting a mastectomy, a double mastectomy. It's called top surgery, a masculinization of chest, a removal of my breasts. It's oftentimes something that a lot of folks like me like to do for gender affirmation purposes. And I did that thinking that I was going to still compete as a woman because it was going to be this in between. There's no rule within the NCAA, again, the governing body of sports in this country, that says you can't do that and also compete as female. So like I said, I was going to do this in between. When I got back from that, my coaches said, why don't you meet the men's team? Just get to know them, hang out with them. We know you've gotten to know the women's team. Why don't we make this like a longer recruiting process essentially and get to know the men's team and see how that affects your decision. So I initially sat down with the men's captains and I was very hesitant to do so. I mean, these guys are, 6'4", like bearded Harvard men's swim and dive captains. And I felt like a fetus, honestly. I felt like a baby sitting in front of them, but they're so excited. They're like, okay, so if you want to be like socially part of our team, but don't actually want to compete for us, like that's fine. We'll put you on our email list. You can come to our events. Like you can be on our group meet. It'll be great. You don't actually have to compete for us if you don't want to, but if you want to compete for us, that's great too. We'd love to have you. We know you're nervous about the scar on your chest. Like, don't worry. We're just going to tell everybody a shark bit you. Which I always think is funny that they actually said that, but I think it's even funnier that people actually believe that. So I will show you pictures in a bit. The scar is only on the front of my chest, so I'm really not sure what would have happened to the shark's like bottom teeth. Like, I don't know, maybe he had dentures, who knows. Anyways, the reason I explain this to you this way is that nobody had any idea what we were doing. And yet they were so excited to potentially welcome me to the team to figure out how to make this work. And that was awesome and so scary, because it made that option real. If they had been mean, I could have just thrown that option out. No, they're not, they're not welcoming. I can't do that. But they said, hey, let's try this. And so I thought maybe I could actually do this. So over the next month, I spent some time with them. I got to know them. I felt comfortable. And I had a meeting with the women's coach about a month after that initial meeting with the captains. And she sat me down and she said, Schuyler, I think you know what you want. And the reality is you're standing at the edge of a cliff and you actually have a safety harness on. You just need to jump. You need to take that risk. We're here. We've got you. And I think the reality is your heart knows what it wants. We're just waiting for your mind to catch up. So take that jump, take that risk. I knew she was right, but I also knew I needed to kind of mull it over on my own. So I went home. I said I'd email her. I called my parents. I called some of my friends. I spent some time journaling, writing. And I emailed her that night and said, I think I'm going to take that jump. And so I did.
Introducing the Harvard Crimson, the freshman from Washington, D.C., Schuyler Bailar.
So that's me competing in my first meet as male. And before the meet begins, everybody walks out one at a time. They throw your picture up on the Jumbotron, your name, your hometown, your best stroke. It's a really neat induction onto the team. But they're calling out our names one at a time in alphabetical order. My last name beginning with B means I'm first, which also means I'm alone. So my first college meet, I am marching out all by myself, absolutely alone, and I am freaking out. Not only is it my first meet in college, which means my parents, my family, my friends, and the news are all there because of this whole first trans athlete thing. There's a whole TV crew. So I'm feeling a little bit of pressure from that. It's also my first meet in almost a 2-year break from competition. I had never taken more than like a month off of competition. So 2 years felt very daunting. And lastly, most importantly, this was my first meet competing against other men. And everybody had said that I couldn't do it. There's no way a trans guy like me was going to keep up with, much less beat, other men. So I felt like I had a lot to prove. And I was very afraid that I wasn't going to be able to prove it. So I'm standing there and the rest of my team has now joined me at the edge of this pool. And we're looking out on the water and I'm feeling like everything is so new and so different. And I really am. I'm so nervous. And the national anthem begins to play and it's off key as always. And I think to myself, wait a second. This is the same thing I've been doing my whole life, right? The same national anthem that's always off key, the same 25-yard pool, right? The same 6 strokes of breaststroke, the same 100-yard race. It is the same buzzer, take your mark, boop, that's gonna go off when I dive in. It's the same, right? The same chlorinated air, the same echoey sounds of the natatorium, everything's the same. And I'm standing there, and I don't know for maybe any of you who have maybe you're an athlete or you're a performer, if you have pre-performance or pre-competition rituals. But for me, before every meet during the national anthem, I put my hand over my heart, just like everybody else. But a women's swimsuit has straps on either side, right? And I'd always put my thumb on one side of that strap and my 4 fingers on the other, just like this for every single meet. And I'm at this meet, the national anthem is playing, so I go to do my pre-meet ritual. And I'm like, no strap. And in that moment, I realized that while everything is the same, it's also different. Because for the first time in my life, I'm competing as just me, as just myself. There isn't all this baggage of who I thought I had to be, or who I thought I was supposed to be, or who everybody else told me that I was. I was just me. And that's really why I share my story with you all today, or with any audience ever. It's to prove that possibility, that you could be exactly who you are, whatever that means to you. It doesn't have to be trans or queer or some kind of LGBTQ. It can, of course, and I'm here to prove that as well. But it can also be something that maybe differs from what people expect from you, right? Maybe it's different from what your parents expect from you, what your grandparents expect from you, what your society, what your teammates, your coaches, your teachers, right? What people expect from you. Maybe you can differ from that, right? Hold that difference in your identity and also do what you love. Your identity doesn't ever have to hold you back from your passions. So that's really the blurb, the background I wanted to give you before we jump into questions. But the last thing I'm going to do is just give you some vocab so that we start all on the same playing field for language, because I think language is super important, especially when talking about marginalized folks. And then we'll hop in and SK will ask me some questions. So we don't need to watch that again. Oh, well, first I'm going to show you mostly half naked pictures of myself, or mostly naked pictures of myself. This is just a picture from the pool that I like to share. I said I was going to show you pictures of my scar. If you notice underneath my nipples, there's like a lazy W, if you will. That is my mastectomy scar. If you think it looks like a shark bite, you're welcome to think that I'm more badass than I am. It's not a shark bite though, I can assure you. This is a photo of me and my teammates at my last meet of my career. I'm in the middle holding the bucket right here. The reason I like to show this photo is before that last race of my entire 18-year swim career, I think I was probably more nervous than I'd ever been. And I was literally shaking as I stepped up on the blocks before the race. But as I did so, my whole team began to chant my name. I actually began to tear up and I thought to myself, not now, guys, like I have one more race to get through. But I don't think there's any better proof that a trans athlete can truly be included on a Division I men's program in college than that moment. Because they weren't cheering for the trans athlete, they were cheering for me. And they knew how hard I'd worked to be there and what the end of my swim career meant to me, and they were there for that. All right, like I said, vocab. Okay, transgender. We're just gonna plow through these so that we can do questions. Transgender is an adjective used to describe a person who does not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. If you do identify with the gender you were assigned at birth, that makes you cisgender. It's really, really important to recognize these are adjectives. That means they describe a noun. So we never say those transgenders over there, or that person transgendered with an ED at the end. Not only are these grammatically incorrect and non-existent words, but they imply different things. So transgenders implies that somebody isn't like an other, and we don't actually include them as a person, right? So instead of saying that transgender period, we say transgender athlete, transgender person, transgender man, right? And the transgendered with the ED at the end implies that something happened to me to make me the way that I am, which is not the case. I just am transgender. Same with cisgender. There's no such thing as cisgendered, the ED at the end. Nothing happened to us to make us trans or cis. We just are or are not. Cool. So transition. This is a word that just means to change from one state to another. But in terms of gender transition, this is any step or steps that a person takes to affirm their gender identity. Any step or step that a person takes to affirm their gender identity. So this can include a lot of things. It can include hormones, surgery, pronoun changes, wardrobe changes, name changes, but it can also include none of those things. And it's really, really important to award the agency to the person transitioning to define their transition for themselves. And because of this, we don't want to say full transition, complete transition, or the transition, as if we know what that means for another person. It also is not super nice to imply that somebody isn't complete or full by saying that, have you gotten that, right? The other thing is, it's no secret to any of us trans people that if you ask us, so have you gotten the complete transition, that what you're really asking is what's in my pants, right? And for many reasons, that's not the most appropriate of questions. If you would like to ask that question to me here today, you are welcome to do so. You have to be brave, but you are welcome to do so because that is a learning space that I've created here. But I would really strongly recommend not doing that in any other scenario. Okay, lastly, we're going to run through together just to make sure that we don't conflate them because people often do. Gender identity is an arrow pointing inwards. It's who I am. It is an internal sense of my own gender. It does not have to match the next word on that list, which is sex, but most often it does because most people are not transgender, and that's why I am here to talk to you all today. Sex on this list, or biological sex. The reason it's here is because a lot of people think you are either biologically male or biologically female. The reality is that is biologically false. There are so many different ways biology shows up in the world than that simple binary. And actually no other part of our body is that binary, but for whatever reason, we reduce biological sex to a binary, right? And we say, oh, penis equals man and vagina equals woman, or we reduce it to chromosomes or something like that. And the reality is it's really not that simple. And we can't actually define biological sex by even one component. There are actually 5 main classes of components. I'm gonna run through this really quickly. I know you don't want a bio lesson most likely, but I do wanna make sure we're thinking about this in the complexity that it has. So biological sex, there's sort of, again, 5 main components. The first thing is chromosomes. You've probably heard of those, XX and XY, but there is also XXY, XYY, and just X. These are chromosomal variations. The next thing is hormones. So you probably have heard of testosterone and estrogen. Most people have both of these, right? It's just the differing in concentrations that people have that exhibit different effects. But the reality is there's also way more than those two. There's actually way more androgens, of which testosterone is one, but there's also estradiol, progesterone, dihydrogen testosterone, so lots of different kinds of sex hormones. Next one is the hormone receptors or the hormone expression. It means that you actually need the right receptor for the hormone in order to express the effects of it. So think about it this way. I have an iPhone. If somebody hands me an Android charger, first of all, I'll be like, well, why do you have an Android? Sorry if you have an Android. But what can I not do with my phone if I have an Android charger? I can't charge it, right? So I need the right charging ports for my hormones in order to actually use them. Last 2, internal genitalia and external genitalia. The reason I'm parsing these all out into separate categories, especially the last 2 of internal and external genitalia, is they don't always develop in these neat little categories of classically male and classically female. Most often they do, right? And most people do fit these neat little categories, but not everybody does. And the folks' bodies who don't are called intersex. That means between sex. And actually 2% of the population is intersex, which is the same frequency as is redhead. So if you know a redhead, statistically speaking, you also know somebody who's intersex. So think about how common you know redheads to be, right? And then apply that to people who are intersex. A reminder that there's nothing wrong with folks' bodies who are intersex. It's just a natural expression of human biological diversity, as I've discussed here today. Last word on the list is just gender expression. That's really just the way we communicate our gender. It is a completely social, it is completely a social construct bound by time period, by culture, by geographic location. I think about it this way. Thousands of years ago in Korea, it was very common to see men wearing dresses or robes, right? In this day, age, culture, geographic location, and epoch, it is far more common to see women wearing dresses. That doesn't mean that if I stand here in front of you today, as a man, were to throw on a dress, it wouldn't make me a woman. It would be me, myself, a man wearing a dress. So again, social construct. A lot of people like their gender expression to match how they identify because it's a way of communicating, but it doesn't have to. All right, all of these words are on my website right there, pinkmannery.com/terminology, and you can visit it there. What I'm actually going to do now is turn it over to SK to ask the first question, and then we'll hop in to have chat delivered questions. But I'm going to keep my screen share up just for a little bit because I'm going to show you pictures for the first question.
That'd be great. Thanks so much, Schuyler. That was really helpful. And honestly, like, I just love how frank you are and how open you are about all of this, because I think this is a topic that we all kind of don't really know how to approach. So thank you so much for your honesty. I think the first question is, how did your family react? I know your mom is Korean American, and you have a halmoni. How did they react to your decision?
So I always like to tell a little story about my family when I talk about it. I'll start briefly about my parents, and then I'll segue into my grandparents. So my mother and my father were very loving, and I always explain that they loved me first and foremost, and they didn't always understand. And I think that's really all you can ask of somebody, because understanding is difficult. Understanding comes with time, and understanding comes with experience. And I think oftentimes we get caught trying to get people to understand when all we really need them to do is support and to love us. And on the flip side, for the people who are trying to be supports, they get stuck trying to understand and forget to love. And so if you're an ally here, if you're trying to learn also about how to better support LGBTQ folks, you don't have to understand our experiences perfectly. In fact, you don't really have to understand them at all. You just have to love and support somebody and walk through it. It's like holding somebody's hand. You don't have to know exactly where they're going or what they're doing. You can still hold their hand. So my parents have been wonderful about that. The understanding bit was difficult, and they like to understand things. So we definitely got in some fights where they were built on how they didn't understand. And I just was like, listen, you're just not going to understand. You don't have to. And they did over time, which I think was really important. My grandmother, so my halmoni, is a Korean conservative, very Catholic immigrant. She moved here in the 60s. My mother and her whole family moved here in the 60s. And when I actually came out as gay, I decided not to tell my halmoni or anybody in my Korean family. I thought, you know what, maybe one day I'll marry a woman and then I'll tell them. But until then, we don't need to deal with it. When I came out as trans, though, I really did need to tell them for a couple of reasons. One, I look different. I also sound different. I could only tell her I was sick for so long. And also it was going to be all over the news. And so I actually came out on Facebook, though, before I told my grandmother, because I got sick of telling people one at a time. So I made a big Facebook post. But it turns out halmoni has a Facebook. And so I actually blocked her on Facebook. And I told all of her friends, who were also my friends, our mutual friends on Facebook, not to tell her. And I said, please let me get there on my own. I spent about a month writing her a letter. And I was trying to find the language with which to tell her. I mean, she speaks English and I speak some Korean, but I wanted to see if I could make that easier that way. So I looked up some translations, and it turns out the translation for transgender is transgender, just said with a Korean accent, turan su chenda, and gay is gay. So translation wasn't really going to be helpful at all. So instead, I explained what it meant to be trans to me and how I was trans, kind of evidence supporting my transness, if you will. And I ended with a paragraph that said, halmoni, I'm telling you this because I love you. And because I respect you deeply, and I desperately want you to stay in my life. And I hope that you can understand that. So my mom and we drove over to my grandmother's house to read her this letter. And I mean, honestly, we were pretty sure that that was going to be it. Like I was fairly certain that my grandmother was going to just completely stop talking to me, perhaps disown me and my mother too. And I still like, I knew I needed to tell her, and I knew I had to. So we drove over and I sat them down at the table and I read them the letter. And I ended with, "I love you, Schuyler." And I waited. My grandfather, Harabaji, began to clap. And he goes, "So you come out of closet now." And I'm like, "Harabaji, what? Like, I just spent months trying to find the language with which to tell you this, but you already have it? Like, where did you learn coming out?" And my grandmother's looking at me and she's like, "I knew that." She got this really stern look on her face. "I knew that." And I'm like, "Harmony, what are you talking about? You spent my entire childhood making me try to be like a girly girl. What do you mean you knew that? I didn't know that, you know?" My mom has started to cry at this point. Harmony's like, "I knew that. And she goes on to this like rant about how trans people are biologically normal or something. And she was like, "You have boy hormones." And I'm like, "Harmony, that's probably the problem. I don't have those, right?" But she goes on this rant and she ends by saying, okay, so you can be a boy and you can be a brother and you can be a husband. I'm like, "Wait a second, husband, slow down. You can be a doctor." I'm like, "Oh my God, gender roles, Harmony, we need to bring you into the century." But you know, we'll deal with that later. She says, "You can be a man." But in Korean culture, it is the daughter's responsibility to take care of the parents, and your mother has no more daughters. And she then went into this little rant about how wonderful a daughter my mother was and how much she appreciated my mother. And my mother is now bawling because my Harmony has never said anything that positive about her daughter. I think maybe any of you who are also Korean daughters, you might have experienced that, but there's not a lot of like active love that is spoken. There might be a lot of felt love, but there's not a lot of that spoken love. So I think it was so amazing to watch my Harmony praise my mother for her essentially her filial piety. So she says, your mother has no more daughters and your mother has taken excellent care of me and she has nobody to take care of her. So you, Schuyler, you still have to take care of your parents. And I literally said to my 83-year-old Korean conservative Catholic grandmother, I said, "Dude, I got you." But I literally, I said that. There's actually a recording of that whole conversation. But I have her words. I have Harmony's words. Pumo hyodo, it means take care of your parents, mother, father, filial piety, tattooed in her handwriting, actually, beneath my mastectomy scar. It is next to my heart on the left side. It is my tribute to my history, my culture, the people from which I come, my grandmother, and all the work that she has done to bring all of us into the world and my family. And it's a tribute to the promise that I've made to take care of my parents, but most importantly, it's a tribute to the daughterhood that I was assigned, and the culture that is attached to that daughterhood. And though I never truly identified with that daughterhood, I will absolutely fulfill the duties. So I got the tattoo, I think in 2016 or 17. And I texted Harmony. She's very woke, like texting and all. But I texted her and I asked her if she could write the sentence "Pumo hyodo" for me. And she texted me back a photo of the writing. And I told her I was going to get a tattoo. And she responded with the emoji that's like this, like the praying hands emoji. And she says, "Thank you for taking this eternal vow to take care of your parents." But I always share that to prove possibility. So I think Harmony had every single excuse she could possibly muster to not accept me. She had culture, she had religion, she had age difference, she had language barriers, she had everything. And yet she said, "You know what? I'm gonna lead with love." We had all these excuses I can make, but I'm gonna lead with love. So if my Harmony can do that, I think anybody can. Does that mean anybody will? No. And I want to be really clear that I understand that this is an immense privilege that I own to have my grandmother accept me with this kind of open love, with my Korean family accept me with this open love. I know it's a privilege and I'm fighting for the day when it is not. And I know KCS is contributing to that work as well, fighting to include our voices and recognize that Korean people can be queer too, right? But for now, it's not a right or an expectation. It is a privilege, and I'm very grateful for that. But it is a possibility, and it's proof of that possibility. And Harmony has actually been the most supportive. She's the one on the right in this green shirt. She's been the most supportive out of any of my family members with pronouns. I don't know, somehow she just figured out, and she's never called me the wrong pronouns, immediately switched pronouns. And now her newest thing is to call me, like, for a while she was telling me how like handsome I was. Everything's, "Oh, so handsome, you're so handsome, so handsome." And the newest thing is to call me a great man. Everything is like, "Oh, you are a great man." And I'll be like, I'll call her, I'll be like, "Oh, Harmony, what did you do today?" I ate dinner. And she's like, "You ate dinner? Oh, you're just a great man." I'm like, okay, cool. But she's a very supportive person these days, and I don't really know where it came from. Another anecdote, and then we'll shift to the next question. But we went to Korea last winter for the holidays, and I was terrified. I hadn't seen most of my Korean family, which is enormous for some reason, since way before I had transitioned. And I was very nervous to see them. And I don't have the language to explain everything in Korean, and most of my Korean relatives don't speak a lot of English. And I said that to Halmoni, very kind of like on the side. I said, Halmoni, when we go to Korea, like, is anybody going to care that I'm trans? And she was like, no. And I was like, but are you sure? And she's like, no, they won't say anything. And I was like, okay, but what if they do? And she's like, well, I'm going to yell at them. And her like response was so intense. She was just like, no, of course they're not going to have a problem, because if they have a problem, they have a problem with me. And there was no problems. So again, I'm very aware of that privilege, but it is proof. It is such proof of love and proof of possibility of love. So I'm going to exit screen sharing now. But yeah, SK, go for it.
Yeah, your Halmoni is like the coolest Halmoni ever.
She's pretty cool. I can't say anything bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had like such an incredible support network around you, just between your parents and your grandparents and even your teams. Like I actually found that pretty surprising that you didn't find so much resistance to your decision to switch teams.
Sure. Yeah. I think about that a lot, and I wonder often, actually, especially in the beginning of my transition, I wondered a lot about why that was the case, because I know a lot of people are not met with the kind of support that I have been, and I wonder why me? And I've really been trying to investigate it in as much of like a ego aside kind of way, right? Just kind of looking at it. And I think there's a number of reasons. I think privilege is huge. So having parents that support me is a really big deal. And that part of that's luck. Part of that is the work my parents have done and the relationship we have worked on. I know a lot of that is not luck, because I did a lot of work with them through my treatment, being able to communicate with them. And I was very firm with my communication with them. And I think that firmness is often taken as confidence, which is taken as I can trust you. Right. And I think a lot of times if a kid is not grounded in how they present something, that can be a negative to them, not because they shouldn't be believed, but because a parent is more nervous when a kid is not sure. And I think that had an impact as well. And we had built that trust together. So I had the ability, because of, again, privilege of how they received me, and also because of the work that we had done to communicate better. I felt like I could tell them, no, you're wrong. I'm right. I know who I am. Right. And that's a huge piece in this. And I tell that to every kid that I mentor when they're coming out. You need to pretend that you're confident. And it doesn't matter if you're not confident. I know it's hard, but I know you know who you are, and you have to pretend in that moment that's it. Because the more you communicate that confidence, the more people receive you with that confidence. And that's something that I'm very good at, and something that I've built over time to be good at. Beyond that, the other thing that I think about, okay, so again, I want to say kind of privilege aside, because I always want to recognize there's so much privilege in people, and luck in that privilege, right? Getting lucky with coaches like Kevin, the men's coach, had taken a gender studies class. That's luck. I don't know why he did that. He just had. And that he's just a good person. I got lucky that he happened to be at Harvard too, right? And I got lucky with some of the people on the team. But a lot of the things so I can't teach people how to be lucky, but I can teach people to do the things that I did that I think were helpful, right? And some of the things that I did were also encouraging communication across difference. And I think that's the number one thing that, what is the right word, endears people to me, because when I'm in a space, I'm not going to shut down something. And I think people like to learn. And if they think that there's red tape around something, then they are going to be afraid of me. And that's going to cause hatred that might not actually be hatred. It might just be ignorance. Now, I say that, and I have a lot of wherewithal for ignorance. I have a lot of ability to answer questions. I have a lot of privilege of grounding, privilege of mental health from the amount of work that I've done. That's also a privilege to be able to step into those conversations that not everybody has. So as allies, really important for you all, and also understand if you are trans, like you don't have to do what I do. Allies step up, right? In those places, you educate, you help, and you point people to resources so that we don't have to do that all the time. And the last thing that I think is really, really key in how my support system has been built is I think belonging is two-sided. And what I mean by that is somebody can open the door to me as many times and as wide as they want, but if I don't step into that space, I will never feel like I belong there. And I think that a lot of folks who are marginalized won't walk into doors that have been even cracked or opened wide because they are afraid of what's inside. And it's from trauma, it's from real data, right, of not being accepted. It's from fear of what happens inside there. And it's really valid why somebody won't walk inside. But I think we have to challenge ourselves to do it anyways. And I think sometimes that door is slammed shut, and that's what the civil rights movement is, banging down those doors that shut us out. But sometimes those doors are wide open and we just won't walk through them. Or we walk through with our shoulders like this, and then we don't feel like we belong and we wonder why. And I think one of the things that I really worked on was walking into every space like I belonged. And it didn't matter whether or not somebody shut the door or opened the door. I was gonna walk into that space. And again, that's not necessarily a feeling that I had. It's an act. A lot of it is an act. And sometimes I think confidence is a backwards feedback loop. It's not have confidence so you can do the thing. It's do the thing so that you can have the confidence.
That's really interesting. I think we had a question here about, like, when you were making that decision to swim for the men's team instead of the women's team,
Sure.
Why did it feel so important for you to do that at that point? Like, could you have swum the first year for the women's team and then seen how it goes and how you felt and then switched over? Why did you make that decision at that point?
Yeah, so I smile because we went through every single permutation of that when I was trying to figure out what to do. Initially, I was going to try to just stave off my transition and just compete for the women's team because it was so important to me to compete as a woman and kind of continue the success that I had built for myself. And that there was no wrong or right decision for, sort of objectively speaking. It was all what was wrong or right for me. And I always like to stress that, like, any other athlete could have made a different decision in that moment because that was what was right for them. But I ended up concluding that transition was what was going to make me happy. And I needed to take that risk for my own happiness. And anything stopping me was me trying to, what I call, try to get paper successes. Paper successes are things you can write down on paper and say, this is something I've done, right? So good grades, gold medal, driver's license, I don't know, a certificate and an award, right? These are paper successes. These are great. People like achievements. They're the things that you can apply to jobs with. But the reality is, like, at the end of the day, if you don't have a strong sense of self, if you don't have a self-love, paper successes mean nothing. And I had spent my life building a paper success list, right? And I had gotten where? To mental health treatment, depressed and suicidal. And my dad stopped me at one moment when we were having conversations about this and what I wanted to do about the teams. And he said, Schuyler, you keep on saying you want to compete as a woman for college because you're going to break all these records and do whatever, because that's a goal of yours, but you've already broken so many records and you've already done all these things. And are you happy? Does it mean anything to you? And he was like, it sounds like to me that these things don't actually mean a whole lot to you. You've said that you've done those things and they feel empty because you're not actually who you are. And I was like, whoa. And I really took a pause there and I thought, wow, I have gotten a lot of these successes. And to that point, I'd gotten pretty much all the success that I had hoped to have. And it had brought me no happiness, no fulfillment. It had brought me misery. And that was the moment that I thought, I really got to take this leap for myself.
Wow. We are a Korean organization and many of the people here today are Korean. How do you think of your Korean identity? How does that fit in for you with your transgender identity? And also, have you been, I think there was one person who asked a question about being really excited to find fellow LGBT plus Koreans. What has your experience been?
Yeah. So one of the things I think about oftentimes, especially with my own experience, is that I kind of end up, especially when people ask me about identity and intersections of identity, there's kind of two sides to this. One is that, well, they're kind of the same thing, which is I don't know how to segment my identity into different pieces of myself, right? And I know, I understand the question. I'm not, this is not a dig at the question. It's just as I sit here and think like, okay, like how does my trans impact me? How does my Koreanness impact me? How does my swimming, like, I'm like, how do I pull myself into all these different like bubbles and then say like, oh, these individual things are contributing to whatever, right? So there's kind of that thought. And what I think about though, is I'm kind of like a 1% of a 1% of a 1%. And at the end of the day, I'm kind of in the corner by myself with my identity and I don't see anybody like me. And if you think about it, like I'm Korean, but I'm not just Korean, I'm half Korean, I'm Korean American, right? Or half Korean American. I'm also an athlete, I'm also transgender, I'm also queer, I'm also a Harvard student athlete, right? And all these kinds of things. I also struggle with an eating disorder. Like if you get all those like experiences into the corner, like there's nobody, I've never seen anybody else like me, right? And it's kind of like a choose two type of deal, right? I can find somebody who's Korean and struggle with an eating disorder. I can find somebody who's Korean and trans. I can find somebody who's trans and a swimmer. I can find somebody who's a swimmer and Korean. Like choose two, maybe three, but at no point am I going to have all of those things, and that's okay. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I think oftentimes if we don't see ourselves reflected like 100% in other people, we either conclude that A, we don't or shouldn't exist, or B, that other people aren't like us. And that's not true. People are like us. They just might not share everything about us. And I tried really hard, I think, in my process, especially in college, to sink into that and to remind myself that it was okay if I found unity and kinship and connection through people who didn't get everything. And I think the more we can allow ourselves that, it doesn't matter who you are, by the way, any of you here, the more I think that we actually find good connection and the more we allow that kind of connection. So kind of a roundabout way of answering that, I think that my Korean identity is really, really important to how I walk through the world, but I don't know how to piece it apart from other things. And I think, honestly, perhaps it's the first thing that explained to me how to be an in-between, because I think being half Korean and half white has been always something I'm aware of. I don't remember ever not being aware of that because my dad was white and my mom was Korean, and there was a clear way that people perceive them differently. And I mean, the question I got been asked my entire life has always been, who are you? What are you more? Are you more Korean or are you more white, right? Like, or which one do you feel more of, or whatever? And I'm like, I don't know. What kind of question is that, you know? But people always ask that, and they ask how important is Koreanness to you? And I'm like, this is who I am, you know? So it has been difficult to find community in that, and especially LGBTQ community, because I think Koreans are a little bit quiet about that kind of stuff and a little bit on the conservative end. So it's been lovely to have spaces like this. I will also note that if any of you are looking for community as queer folks, I have a website that's all about connections through shared identity as queer folks, and I'll drop that in the chat. But it's basically like a anonymized Excel spreadsheet as a website that will allow you could put Korean in as one of the like whatever it's called, like parameters, and you can connect with other folks like you.
That's great. I just saw in the chat there's one person here who is a queer Korean American swimmer. So that
wow, look at that. We got 3. That's incredible. Look at that.
That's great. We did have one question also about, you know, like as an athlete, you're very much in tune with your body. When you did transition, how did that aspect change for you? And what did that feel like to be swimming as a without breasts?
Yeah, sure.
After your surgery.
So I think for the most part, it's not strikingly different. And the reason I say that is because I am an athlete and I am very in tune with my body. And I think I just paid attention to how I felt, and my strokes change accordingly, right? Like swimming is all about hydrodynamics, about, you know, gliding through the water. And if you pay attention to your body, as I you know, learned to throughout my experience as an athlete, I wasn't like actively being like, must change this. I think it was more intuitive. But in terms of my chest, I think that was definitely an interesting experience to jump into the pool in a you know, a boy's suit for the first time. And I remember being, freaking terrified. I walked out on deck and I walked out with all my clothes on because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to walk out here in like just these like tiny little jammers or whatever. So jammers are the ones that go down to your knees, and usually like either older men or young boys wear them. But if you're like a competitive athlete, then you wear tiny Speedo. So I was also like, the only reason I'm trying to say this, you can wear whatever you want, whoever you are. But in terms of like social, like awkwardness, it was awkward for me as like a college aged man to be not wearing a Speedo like everybody else. But I wasn't comfortable to wear the tiny little Speedo just yet. So I wore the jammers. I was so afraid. And I remember the coach being like, okay, just take your clothes off and get in. Once you're in the water, it's going to be fine. Like nobody cares what you think, like just get in. So I like stood at the edge of the pool. Like I've never taken off my shirt and my pants so fast. And I did both like so quickly and fell into the pool. But he was right. Once I got in the water, I felt fine. And it's just about being in the water and getting used to a different kind of hydrodynamic suit, because the suit doesn't feel the same way. It catches the water differently, but we're getting into specifics about swimming.
I guess, you know, do you feel ever like you could have done things differently, or that, you know, I'm sure you're competitive, but you're not probably winning against the men. Sure. Do you ever feel like, oh, maybe I could have swum for 1 year and won that NCAA championship or anything like that?
It's hard to tell. And I think the what if game is a deadly task. And I think that, you know, the moment that I always like to tell answers and anecdotes, the moment that really kind of like, what is the right word? Like bothered me the most was I was at my first travel meet at Columbia in New York City. And that meet, usually the meets are separate, girls and boys, but at that meet, the girls swim before the boys. And so we watch the girls swim and we cheer for them and then we swim. And so we got the tail end of the girls meet and we watched the 100 breaststroke, which is my best event. And our girls, the Harvard girls, lost by probably like 1 or 3 seconds. It was a good amount. It's probably 3 seconds. And and my teammate bumps me and he's like, Schuyler, like, isn't your best time better than that? And I was like, why you gotta remind me? But they had gone 10, I believe it was a 106 in the 100 breaststroke, which is like decent in-season time. I, 2 or 3 hours later, competed in the same event, but against the boys, and I went a 101. 5 seconds in a pool is half a pool length. So I would have probably won by at least half a pool length had I been competing as female. And at that point, I had only been on testosterone for like 4 months. So no hormonal differences at that point, because it takes years for that stuff to really make a difference, or more than 3 months. And so that moment was difficult for me. And I remember sitting there being like, gosh, it would have been so. I mean, I got 14 out of 15. On the men's side, right? So I got 14 out of 15 people, men's side, and I would have gotten first by 5 seconds on the women's side. And I remember just being really upset, but also I thought, gosh, I'm so happy to be here with the team. I'm so happy to be with the guys. That was one of the days that I was getting filmed for some like event, and all the guys were super supportive, and it was just a neat experience to have that. And I think there's just different kinds of glory. And one of the things I think about often is grief. And I think grief is something that we don't know how to deal with as a society. We're never taught how to deal with. We're taught to distract. We're taught to throw away. We're taught to not feel. And grief has been the central part of my experience. And welcoming grief has been the number 1 coping mechanism. And it sounds funny, but people always ask me, how do you stay so positive? And I say positive by allowing myself negativity. And if I don't grieve, I put everything in a box and it explodes in my face every couple of days. But if I grieve, then I welcome my humanity, right? I'm a whole person by being able to experience what things are hard. And there are so many things that are hard in life. And it can be something that's like really hard, like somebody dying, right? But it can also be something as simple as like, gosh, I wish I would have won that race, right? And things that are more complex, all things in between. And I think that in that moment, it was really important for me to be like, gosh, I'm super upset that I didn't get to be that, right? My life is so complicated that I couldn't have just been, whoever I was from birth and compete in a kind of quote normal linear way. And I had to do this weird thing in college. Okay. But look at this amazing place that I am now. And let me see how, even though that door is shut or complicated or painful, there's all these other doors that are opening up, and both are true. It doesn't make the grief any less. It doesn't make the happiness any less. It makes both of them very important and very present.
Wow, that was so wise. I'm amazed, Schuyler, that at that answer, because I feel like it takes years for people to be able to accept that is a core part of moving forward and accepting your identity in a way. So that's incredible. I think that there was a question here from a parent of a transgender daughter, who's very grateful for you being here today. The question was, when people ask you personal questions about surgery or fertility or anything like that, how do you answer gracefully without really answering?
Okay, so a couple of thoughts. I do this on stage often. Most people don't. So I like to just share what happens there, because I think it's the most extreme version of this. And then we can kind of piece it to like smaller interactions. So on stage, this happens most often with younger people, when I say younger people, I mean like children. So elementary school, middle school, high school, and people will raise their hands and be like, do you have a penis? Or do you still have a vagina? Or whatever, right? One kid raised his hand and he was like, do you still have female parts? Anyways, lots of people ask it many different ways. The older the person gets, the more complex the question gets, the more convoluted people get. And I actually prefer the younger kids because they get right to the point, right? Anyways, the whole point is what's in my pants, right? And when people ask me that question, I actually pause and I say, awesome, thank you so much for asking this question. It's a great question. I'm actually going to ask you a question in response. I'm just curious if you ask your friends how long their penises are or what their clitorises look like. In a stage, in a group of people, there's immediate laughter and very uncomfortable faces. And it's like the uncomfortable, like, ha, 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 he just asked that. He just, what? And if the little kids are there, like the really little kids, like, oh my God, he said penis, he said vagina, whatever. Lots of different interactions, but mostly it's discomfort. right? And so I say, awesome. So this reaction is actually perfect because you guys just got super uncomfortable. And I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, but you all just got really uncomfortable. And that's because the question that I'm asking you is really the same question that you're asking me. And so when you ask me about what's in my pants or whether or not I have a vagina or a penis or whatever, you're actually asking me the same thing as asking your friend how long his penis is. And that's kind of weird. And people are like, oh, and they really like get it, you know, they're like, oh my gosh. And then I say, so when somebody asks me about my surgery, it is the same thing as asking any of your cis friends, your not trans friends, what their vulvas, vaginas, or penises look like. And nobody does that. And if you do, you might need to reassess your priorities. And so when I say this also with little kids, there's always some kid in the back who raises his hand. He's a little jokester and it's funny. But for the most part, you all know this, nobody goes around asking their friends or even their dates, by the way, because the next thing is like, oh, what if I date this person? Nobody walks up to their potential date and says, hey, how long is your penis? Please give me a picture of your vulva before we go on a date. And if they do, they get blocked really fast, right? So even if you are going to be interacting with these parts, and I know I've gotten very vulgar in these moments, but I want to be really clear with you all, right? Even if you're interacting with those parts or you're going into a romantic situation, that still should not be the first question that you ask, or really a question that you ask. That person should be able to get there. It can be relevant in a dating scenario, but it should not be a deciding factor, in my opinion. I think love comes first. And if you are not going to be dating the person, then it is literally irrelevant. Unless you screen your friends for how long their penises are before they're your friends, which again, if you do, you might need to reassess your priorities. Okay, so my point in saying all this is to give you a ton of ammo, right? A lot of different ways to think about it, to talk about it with other people who maybe ask these questions or who talk about it. If you are a person who's not trans, have these conversations with other people. If somebody around you, another cis person says something like, oh, I wonder if they've had the surgery, say, whoa, why are you wondering what their genitals look like, man? What's wrong with you? Or why does it matter to you, right? Engage other cis people in these conversations because it's actually more effective for you to do that together than for me to yell at you about it. That's how you can be an ally. Okay, directly to this person who's asking about their trans daughter, I think you can actually, especially if you're the parent, you can say, hey, that I kind of understand where that question is coming from, and I get that you're curious, and I'm going to assume best intent in that curiosity, but would you ask me what my genitals look like? And if my daughter wasn't trans, would you ask me what her genitals look like? Because that's really weird. And they're going to say no, and they're going to also backpedal, and they're going to be like, oh, and you're going to say, hey, no, okay, put the shame away. And just understand that wasn't the best question to ask. It actually has no relevance to you. Unless you're going to date my daughter with, again, weird way to start that question. How asking her out for dinner is probably better, method, unless, they're underage, in which case go away. So hopefully this is helpful and a little funny. Yeah. But that's kind of how I go about it. And it's many different, I said a lot of different things so that you can take pieces of it, whatever is most appropriate in the moment. But the key is to make the person think about what they would normally do when trans isn't involved, and then apply that because we're still people.
Right. I think we have about 5 to 10 minutes left. I don't know if there's, we have a couple more questions that we haven't covered, but I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add.
I'm happy with questions, yeah. Okay,
so one of the questions here is, what do you think a queer liberation looks, feels, and sounds like?
Gosh. Do you want a manifesto? I mean, I've done long answers up until now. Let's see. I think the shortest way to say that is let's say a world in which people are not policing other people's bodies or expression or description of themselves. I think is the most liberating world, and I say that in those words and kind of in its ambiguity on purpose, because I think actually some of the worst policing I've seen has come from within the queer community. And I think queer liberation looks also like queer people liberating themselves from the internalized queerphobia that we experience, the internalized racism, the internalized misogyny, and all that kind of stuff. I think queer liberation must come with also dismantling white supremacy. It has to come with all of us, especially as Koreans, engaging ourselves in anti-racist work and anti-racism work and recognizing how our experiences are different from BIPOC folks and especially Black and Indigenous folks. I think it's all integral. And I think when we leave any of it out, we leave out people. And if we leave out people, it's not liberation. So I think that the more we can kind of pull the intersectionality in that and recognize that recognize that kind of intersectionality, I think that's the better. So that's kind of a meandering answer, but I think it's a really complex question.
It is a hard question. It really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the lack of policing is really what I come down to, because I think about this often when people say to me, oh, like, you know, you look like a girl, or you're supposed to be a girl, or what. I'm like, do you think that I care about what your opinion is about me? Does my gender identity depend on your opinion? Like, you can hurt me, right? You could say something mean and that could hurt my feelings. Of course, I'm a human. It hurts my feelings when people say mean things, right? But it actually doesn't change who I am. And for somebody to tell me who they think I am is just such a ridiculous concept. And the more we can all understand that, right? If I tell you I'm hungry, you can't tell me I'm not. You can't be like, no, you're not hungry. You don't know what I have. How are you supposed to say that, right? In the same way, if I tell you that I know who I am, you can't tell me that I'm not. I mean, you can, logistically speaking, but it makes no sense. And I think that the more we can recognize about any part of anybody's identity, even if we don't agree with it, even if we don't get it, even if we don't understand it, or even if it does sort of violate our beliefs, we don't get to present that to somebody else, because actually that's surmising that we have their brain and that we can then get inside their brain and tell them who they are, which we can't.
So this is my last question for you. Like, you know, when you think about the future for yourself, for you personally, but also with the election right around the corner, what do you kind of see 5 years, 10 years from now? What do you see as for yourself and for
myself and what I want to do in the future?
Yeah. Where do you think you will be in 5 years, 10 years?
Well, I always say I hope I have an apartment and a cat, and I hope I'm in a loving relationship. But kind of beyond that, I plan currently on going to grad school and getting a PhD in clinical psychology, so that I can both do research and also practice as a psychologist. I do a lot of mentorship and life coaching now. I make it very clear I'm not a therapist, but it's something I do to provide free or very affordable services to LGBTQ youth specifically, and other LGBTQ folks who need that kind of resource. And actually, this is a perfect time to bring up my slide. So that's something that I do. Oops, what is it? There we go. I'll leave this up here as I finish talking, but these are my links. I think that something where I'm like in academia / research / like still doing this kind of mentorship work is where I want to be. I'm publishing a book next fall. It's a short story that is about a Korean American swimmer who, it's a fiction novel, an 8th grader. This is a preview of that, but I also intend to be writing books. So I'm assuming that I hope I'll be able to keep doing that 5-10 years from now as well. So yeah, I don't know. It's not really a specific thing, but grad school is probably the biggest thing that I'll probably still be doing, because I doubt that I'm going to get finished in a 6-year period. So yeah, I like to just leave these links up here before we wrap them and go to the other slides that you have to share. So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm also on TikTok, but I don't do anything on TikTok, and I don't understand TikTok. So you can find me there, but I don't know what you can find there. But the main thing to share is that I offer free 30-minute video chat support sessions for people who can't pay. They are pay as you can, ranging again from free to whatever works for you. And I really try to make those available for folks who don't have access to that kind of mentorship, and to other trans people essentially, and LGBTQ people who need it. If you are interested, you can email me. I think all my slots are taken right now, but I release slots every Monday. So if you check in next week, there should be more slots. And if you can pay, or you're interested in life coaching with me, you can also reach out via email and we can schedule something. And that's my little plug. So thanks for listening. It's been a pleasure to chat with you all today and sharing this space, especially as a queer Korean American, a queerian, if you will, has been lovely.
Thank you so much, Schuyler, for sharing your story with us tonight. As a Korean mom, I have to say you were like a dream child. Not only did you go to Harvard, but you love your parents so much, and you have that tattoo. You literally have a tattoo near your heart. So that was amazing. So thank you so much again for joining us. Yeah.
I'm gonna turn off the screen share so you can do yours.
Okay, great. You also made me cry, so my mascara is like running. So yeah, a part of our events tonight is going to be a little introduction to the mental health clinic that KCS runs. As Schuyler mentioned, mental health was so important for him. Mental health care was so important for him in allowing him to break the cycle of self-harm, and allowed him to kind of uncover his true identity. And there's so many people in the Korean American and the Asian American communities that KCS serves that are in desperate need of mental health care as well. The suicide rate among Korean Americans has skyrocketed since 2003, and it's actually the highest among all Asian American groups. And I'm sure it will not surprise you to hear that Asian Pacific Islander kids are significantly less likely to talk to their parents about their LGBT plus identities than kids of other races. So KCS's mental health clinic is the only place in New York State where patients can receive affordable psychotherapy and other psychiatric services in Korean. We've created a special fund called the Angel Fund that allows even uninsured and undocumented clients to access mental health care at the clinic. Just $150 will underwrite one psychotherapy consultation. So we just ask you to consider making a donation. We'll send links, and I think the link might be in the chat box already. And now one of our associate board members, Stephen Cho, will tell you more about how to become more involved with KCS, how to donate, how to volunteer. Take it away, Steve.
Hey, thank you. Schuyler, thank you so much for sharing your true, authentic story and making us all tear up a few times too. But when we thought about who to reach out, your story, I'd say, just resonates so much from being biracial, transgender, but also the fact that you had such a strong Korean cultural heritage. Your story gives us hope to so many who may not even have the same support and privilege. Growing up as a gay Christian Korean American myself, having multiple intersectionalities of my identity, I rarely saw any representation like me. And it's something that I personally struggled with. But as you said, it's okay. You are unique, and that's what makes you you. I love the quote you say, I stay positive to allow myself by being negative and grieving and allowing myself to really experience that humanity. So I love that. But I also kind of want to talk about a few other things. A large part of this is that we, in the LGBT spectrum, we talk about the G and the L a lot. As a gay man, it's everywhere, but less so much of the T. And so it was also especially really good to hear stories like yours to give visibility, and not just to the Korean community, Korean American community, but also the larger transgender community. That being said, it's been 2 years for me. I've been part of this amazing Korean KCS associate board. And a big part of my joining was to be part of this larger Korean American conversation and help create meaningful events like this. It's something that you don't see often. As a gay man, I never saw anything like this. And so before we wrap up, I do have a call to action. If you ever want to get involved or learn more, this is the perfect moment to jump in. We'd love to get to know you more. We have spots for associate board members and welcome anyone who's interested in joining. And also for those who don't identify separately as an LGBT from today's conversation, even better, as Schuyler said before, I hope today's conversation gave more food for thought as to step up as our allies, because you are our biggest advocate. Nothing, I'd say, resonates stronger than a straight ally championing our community and really pushing it through as our biggest advocate itself. You could, simple things like educating those who don't know how to discuss gender identity, or educating yourself and becoming the biggest asset. I would just, from our community, would really appreciate that as well. And lastly, to wrap it all up, please follow us on Instagram. We're relatively new. It's at KCSABNY. Follow us on Facebook and even email us. And because we are a nonprofit volunteer-based organization, any donations towards KCS and even the Angel Fund that SK mentioned would be a tremendous help to us. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Stephen. So before we end the night, we just wanted to recognize and thank our sponsor, Hana Makgeolli. So Hana Makgeolli is a new small business with a unique story that produces traditional Korean rice wine, makgeolli, right here in Brooklyn. They're officially launching on November 1st, just in a couple of days. So please check them out. And for everyone who participated today, you can get 15% discount on all of their products with the promo code HMXKCS. So with that, thank you, Schuyler, for such an educational, inspiring, and honest story. I can't thank you enough, really. It's been a roller coaster of laughter and tears. I'm sure everyone is as touched as I am. So we encourage everyone to take tonight, share it, educate others, and continue the conversation with your friends and families. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll be back with our next event very soon.
And go vote. Bye-bye.
Yay!
We are an early voting site for Northeast Queens, so go vote.
You are. Everybody should be out and voting. Yes, please. Okay, bye-bye.
Yep.